Our first scripture today comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 4. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, and as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it."
Our second reading today comes from the first chapter of Joshua. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because it will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them. Be very strong and courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the left nor to the right, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go."
So this morning we are continuing our sermon series called Living Unafraid, and we'll be talking about the fear of failure. So according to one survey, the fear of failure is the number one fear for those under the age of 50, and the number fourth fear for those over the age of 50. Now, of course, this will take on different forms, as we all have different definitions for what we consider failures. For some, it may be the fear of not being able to provide for themselves or their family. It may be the fear of not getting a promotion or the job we applied for. It may be the fear that a relationship will fail, or simply that that person we ask out on a date will say no. Bottom line, it's the fear that we may possibly be viewed as not enough. It's not an easy thing to ignore when we live in a society that makes success or the appearance of success the only option for everything, and tells us if you don't succeed, you are a loser. But how different would the world be if we didn't allow a perceived failure to stop us from future success? So I'll give a few examples of how people did not let failure get in the way of future success. So now I'm a Red Sox fan. Pastor Gordon will be happy to hear some of these references, but I'll mention the Yankees. So of course we know the Yankees have a long history. They were way successful back in the mid-century, but they did undergo a few decades of kind of mediocrity. So their owner, George Steinbrenner, took over in the 70s, but before that, George Steinbrenner once owned a small basketball team called the Cleveland Pipers, and after 2 years of ownership, they went bankrupt. Then he bought the Yankees in the 70s. They went through decades of not being very good, and then they went on finally to win several World Series at the turn of the century. Walt Disney is another. He was once fired from his job at a newspaper for not being creative enough. Even his first company, called Laugh-O-Gram Films, had to close after just a few short years. And of course, he went on to create Disney, all the movies and the theme parks that we have come to know and love. Steve Jobs, the man who took Apple to great heights, was fired at 30 from the company before he founded a new one, and then was hired back, and then went on to create all these awesome products that we know and love, right, Adam? So Adam and I, we banter back and forth about Apple and Android. But and finally, Gordon will be happy to hear this one. Michael Jordan. So Jordan said, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. Time and time again I failed, and that is why I succeed. But I'd like to take it a step further today and not just talk about being successful in the world, but being able to look at our fears, our perceived inadequacies, and how God can work through us in spite of those things. The Exodus passage today ties back into our sermon a few weeks ago when I talked about the fear of anxiety and how I mentioned that I really resonated with Moses because I felt that I was not eloquent of speech. And so today we have this story of where God is calling Moses to lead his people and be a spokesman for God. God called Moses, and Moses immediately began to make excuses. Time after time, he would say, God, well, I'm not eloquent of speech. He'd always have some sort of excuse, some sort of roadblock, some sort of challenge to avoid God's call on his life. Each time, God would respond and address each of Moses' concerns, but really wanting to avoid God doing God's work, an exhausted and fearful Moses finally cried out, Please, Lord, just send someone else. For crying out loud, Lord, just send someone else. Here, how about this guy? How about this Aaron guy? He can do it for me. We can relate, right? Have we ever felt called to do something that was clearly the right thing to do, but time after time we made excuses to God, to others, and to ourselves? We may have felt anxious, certain that there's no way we can do it. It would be too hard. We'd already convinced ourselves that we would fail. Why can't someone else do it? I know that someone else would be a better fit for this. Why can't God just send someone else? If you're feeling this way, I want you to know that's actually a good thing. Yeah, believe it or not, it is. That's exactly what your starting place should be. You're in good company, for that is how Moses felt. For Moses felt humility. The best work is done by people who do not think they are fit for it. The person who thinks they have all the advantages and gifts will surely falter. You will find that the humble individual, with the help of God, can surely do better than they thought. True success depends on the help of God. God tells us in the book of Joshua to be strong and courageous. Verse 9 is a popular verse telling us to be strong and courageous, to not be frightened, for the Lord our God is with us wherever we go, and surely this is true. But I'd like us to look at part of this passage that we may overlook sometimes. Verse 8 tells us we shall meditate on these words day and night. Then we shall be prosperous and successful. But this meaning of prosperous and successful is not exactly what we think it may be. We have a much different interpretation of what being successful is in modern day, and especially in American culture. So we're going to nerd out for a second here and look at the Hebrew translation of this word. I thought that like every Christian got really excited over looking at Hebrew and Greek, and I didn't know it was just like a kind of a rare thing for me. So I started watching the TV show called Chosen. Some of you may have heard of it or even watched it yourself. It came out sometime in the spring, and I didn't get around to watching it then, but one of my friends passed it along to me, and so I started watching this show. Really cool. Kind of tells a story of Jesus and the disciples. Maybe how the disciples' lives would have been as he called them into ministry. So just a really interesting way of looking at Jesus' life. So my friend passed this, reminded me of this show. So I started watching it, and early in the first or second episode, they're talking about Proverbs 31. Of course, you know it. What is a virtuous woman? And so I start looking at the Hebrew translations of this, and I'm like, I'm getting all into it, and I'm really geeking out. I'm like, there's a whole lot more to this Proverbs than we think, and it's an acrostic poem, and this word actually means this. And I was passing on this info to my friend who was not really as enthused as I was but that's okay. But I will pass on this translation for you all today. So the word for successful in this passage actually means to be prudent. To be prudent. So what does prudent mean? Prudent means to act or show care and thought for the future. That is what it means to be successful. It's not necessarily climbing up the corporate ladder or having a lot of money, but to be successful is to show care and thought for the future. What if that was our definition of success? So if we meditate on the words of the Bible day and night, then we will act and show care for the future. See, we make decisions to become successful based on our own wants and desires. But sometimes we haven't really thought of the consequences. What if our failing at something was really God's way of protecting us? Many times we make decisions with no concern for the future or awareness of consequences of the ripple effect it may have. Sometimes we take better jobs with better pay to provide for our family, but then realize we're never home with our family. Many of us are enticed with a false version of success by a grass is greener on the other side syndrome. And so we go from one thing to the next, chasing an elusive shadow of happiness that we can't seem to catch, instead of listening to what God would have us do right now. See, the fear of failure is not always about the fear of something new. Sometimes it's the fear of failing right where we're at. And instead of listening to God's call in that moment, we feel we need to run away, to delay the inevitable. For it's easier to distract ourselves, knowing we won't have to deal with the consequences for some time, instead of answering the call on our lives right now. So what are you afraid of right now? What is your fear or your fear of failure? The only way to let go of the fear of failure is to first let go of our ego. Ego. You'll hear me say this many times in the future because it's easy to remember. It's something that's always stuck with me. To have an ego is to edge God out. To have an ego is to edge God out. So what is God calling you to do right now? Does it fit your definition of success or God's? I'm going to nerd out on you one more time. My comic book fans will be happy. It's kind of a thing we have with our staff. Apparently there's a lot of Marvel movie fans here. So I hope that you enjoy. We love these movies, right? We love the superheroes, the action, the graphics, the storylines. I used to collect comic books. I used to be really into it when I was a little bit younger. Not so much anymore unless I come across a really rare issue. But my best friend is a huge comic book collector. I mean, it's no telling how many he has. It's got to be at least like 15,000 issues. And he looks just like Captain America. It's great. Like he's built. He has the same haircut. So wherever we go, he actually like, oh, you look like Captain America. Like, okay, if you're Captain America, I got to be like Thor or something, okay? Like, don't leave me out, you know? So all growing up, he tried to get me into comic books. And I'm like, not really my thing. I thought they were, kind of childish. I was wrong. But I was about 20 years old before he finally got me into comic books. So we're sitting around having a conversation about this. And he said, okay, I know one character you're like, the Silver Surfer. So the Silver Surfer, obviously silver, he rides around on a surfboard, but he's really unique. So he possesses great power, but he likes to avoid violence. Only uses this to really de-escalate conflict. He's very contemplative, a very deep thinker. So I think you'd like the Silver Surfer. I know just the issues for you to read. It's called The Parable. The storyline's called The Parable. I'm like, okay, cool, I like parables, right? And so I start reading this parable, and So in this issue, he's hiding out on earth. He's in a trench coat, a hat. He really does not want people to know who he is. He's trying to avoid conflict. He does not want to get involved of the impending disaster that is coming to earth. This evil creature is coming to earth to wreak havoc. But then he finally realizes he needs to do something. He is so afraid of failure, but he realizes he needs to step in and take action. So he's talking to this woman, and this woman asks him, "You think you can make a difference?" "Yes," Surfer says, "for in truth, anyone can make a difference. It is not given to us to know whether we shall succeed or not. In failure, there is no disgrace. There can be but one ultimate shame, the cowardice of not having tried." "Who are you?" she asked. "I am called the Silver Surfer." Where are you being called today? We all have fears. We all may feel inadequate when we rely on ourselves. Even Moses did not feel up to the job. But God did not say, "Work on your speech and then get back to me." No, God said, "Who gave you a mouth to speak?" God will provide us with what we need. And if we meditate on these words in the good book, then we will be strong and courageous. We will be successful. We will be prudent and live into a life that God has called for us. And that, my friends, helps us face the future unafraid. I know we took a break last week from a spiritual discipline, but I would like to invite us to spend a few moments as we meditate on a few things. So I would just encourage you, wherever you are, at home or if you're listening to this later, to just take some time to put yourself in a comfortable position. Go ahead and bow your heads as we meditate on these words that were said today. Joshua was about to lead the people into Israel when these words came to Joshua from God. "Meditate day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." Take a few moments to quiet yourself. Take a few deep breaths and invite God into this space. We know that we all carry with us fears. Lift up your fears to God now. Bring it to the surface. Whatever may be bringing you worry, let God know what you are afraid of today. What is it that is making you fearful? How do you feel inadequate to face this fear? Now remember that God has gotten you through each one of your worst days. Maybe remember a time that was difficult for you. And remember how God gave you strength and brought you here to this place. Still worshiping God, still faithful. Remember how God moved in that situation. Remember the words that God spoke to Moses and assured Moses that he would have the tools necessary to do his work. Let not your fears be a burden, but place them aside and know that God will move and work in you and will provide you with what you need. Meditate on these words day and night. Then you will be successful. Have strength and courage, my friends. God is with you wherever you go, and you can face the future unafraid. Amen.